30 million walnut trees in the Sahel. In a place where the rainy season can feel like a blink, that sentence sounds almost wrong, like someone tried to plant California in the desert. But in Burkina Faso's Sahel belt, the crisis isn't only heat. It's a trapped economy. Farmers work hard, sell low, and watch dust reclaim the land each year. Now a radical plan is circulating, powered by a Traoré-era spirit of self-reliance that pushes local engineers to stop betting on endless imports and start building high-value industries at home. The promise is bold: a walnut belt built from micro-oases, drip irrigation run by solar pumps, rain harvesting basins that trap stormwater, windbreak rows that cut the harmattan, and mulch that holds moisture in the soil. If it works, walnuts don't just mean trees. They mean oil presses, shelling lines, packaging jobs, export contracts, and a crop that can hold value when millet prices crash. But if it fails, it will fail loudly. Wells could drop, villages could fight over water rights, and millions of dead saplings could become the next monument to a beautiful idea that ignored the Sahel's limits. So here's the real question. If you were Boubacar, a 56-year-old millet farmer who's watched miracle tree projects die before, would you risk your land and your water on walnuts this time? In Burkina Faso's Sahel belt, the fight against desertification is inseparable from the fight to earn a living. Most rural families depend on rain-fed millet and sorghum small livestock and whatever cash they can make in the lean months before harvest. When rains arrive later and early, incomes collapse, young people leave, and villages become more exposed to imported cooking oil and packaged foods whose prices they can't control. That is the backdrop for the Walnut Plan. It is sold as land restoration and economic escape at the same time. The visible problem is the land itself, crusted soils wine that lifts topsoil into the harmattan haze and fields that demand more effort for less yield each year. The hidden problem is the value trap. Even in good seasons, farmers sell raw crops into thin markets with little storage, little processing, and weak bargaining power. A crop that looks premium on a global chart becomes meaningless if villagers only experience it as another raw product bought cheap and hauled away. Boubacar, 56, has lived through too many promises to be easily impressed. He farms millet, keeps a few goats, and remembers a tree planting project that arrived with banner seedlings, and jobs then vanished when the pump failed and parts never came. The seedlings died, fences fell, and the land returned to dust. So when he hears 30 million walnut trees, his first question isn't the walnut price. It's where does the water come from, who controls the wells, and what happens to small farmers when a high-value belt is drawn on a map. Reaction split. Some households hear walnut and picture shelling work oil presses, packaging jobs, and a crop that holds value when grain prices crash. Others hear 30 million and picture wells dropping, land being reassigned to investors, and fights over water rights. Traders who profit from today's low-value chains worry that local processing could weaken their leverage. Health workers add a warning: if water is overpumped, the project could trade dust storms for dry taps. In the United States and Europe, walnuts are an industrial crop tied to irrigation, strict grading, and powerful processors. California is the easy reference. The comparison is uncomfortable. The Sahel can't copy that model by importing machines alone. Yet many say a broader Traoré-era spirit of self-reliance has pushed planners to try a different route. Micro-oases, solar pumping, rain harvesting basins, windbreaks, and cooperative processing built locally. And in a moment, I'm going to show you the walnut belt map and the water per tree math that decides whether this is a real economic engine or a conflict waiting to happen. Don't miss it. Subscribe to Desert to Green, because next we have to answer the question that makes or breaks everything: why walnuts biologically, and what exact system keeps them alive in Sahel heat without draining communities dry. Walnuts sound like a luxury crop, but the engineers behind this plan picked them for a hard practical reason: value density. A kilo of millet keeps a family alive for days. A kilo of export-grade walnuts can finance the things Sahel villages can't easily produce: medicine, school fees, spare parts. In a wider Traoré-era spirit of self-reliance, the ambition is to stop exporting low value and start exporting something that can pay for processing and industry at home. Biologically, walnuts are demanding in one way. Most desert trees are not. Many cultivars need winter chill to break dormancy and set flowers properly. Without enough cool hours, leaf out becomes uneven, pollination fails, and yields collapse, even if the tree survives. That's the first unusual constraint, and the reason the plan is not plant everywhere. It is a walnut belt limited to microclimates, higher elevation plateaus, valley bottoms that trap cool night air, and wind-sheltered slopes where night temperatures drop enough for low-chill cultivars to perform. The second constraint is water timing. Walnuts can survive heat with deep roots, but they are vulnerable during flowering and nut fill. Stress in the wrong weeks doesn't just reduce yield, it can wipe out a season. So the core system is water math, not romance. Each orchard block is designed as a micro-oasis, rain harvesting bunds that funnels storm runoff into infiltration basins, heavy mulch and biochar to slow evaporation, and subsurface drip lines that deliver small, frequent pulses instead of wasteful flooding. Solar pumps lift water only when moisture sensors show the root zone is dry, and deficit irrigation is scheduled to protect the two critical phases while allowing controlled stress during less sensitive weeks. The reveal the planners lean on is a spreadsheet and a contract. The spreadsheet is blunt liters per tree per year by age class, plus a maximum pumping limit that triggers an automatic pause in new plantings if groundwater drops. The contract is an offtake agreement for a local shelling and oil press line that pays a premium for graded nuts, proof the project isn't only planting trees, but building a value chain with processing, packaging, and standards. The threat is just as blunt. If water governance fails, wells will drop, and resentment will rise, turning 30 million into a political spark. If processing is captured by a few gatekeepers, farmers will still sell cheap, which opens the next loop. Can Burkina Faso grow walnuts in the Sahel and keep the water rules and profits fair enough that people like Boubacar don't turn against the very trees meant to heal the land? The first walnut seedlings did not arrive with poetry. They arrived on trucks wrapped in damp burlap, tagged by cultivar, and counted like inventory. In the pilot zone, one of the cooler Sahel microclimates crews dug infiltration basins, laid subsurface drip lines, and planted windbreak rows. Boubacar watched them mark each sapling with an ID and measure soil moisture before watering. Inside Burkina Faso, reactions split fast. In the capital, officials talked about foreign exchange and export-grade agriculture, and young agronomists framed the plan as a new kind of self-reliance, an attempt in the wider Traoré-era mood to stop exporting only raw crops and start selling processed value. In the villages, the argument was simpler: water. Who gets pump hours in April? Who decides the pumping cap when the rains are late? Aisha, 29, lives inside that tension. She has 2 children and a husband who leaves seasonally for work. When the pilot promised a shelling and packaging training program for women, she signed up. Steady wages felt like a door out of the lean months. But her mother kept pointing at the same thing every evening: the level in the family well. If the trees drink, she said, what do we drink? Aisha wanted the jobs. She also wanted proof the project would not drain the village to feed exports. Across the region, Sahel neighbors watched with curiosity and anxiety. Some planners were intrigued by the micro-oasis design, rain harvesting basins, windbreak solar pumps. Others dismissed walnuts as a temperate fantasy. Either way, everyone understood the subtext. If this works, it becomes a model, and if it fails, it becomes a warning. Internationally, buyers like the headline, high-value nuts from a new origin, but only if grading and consistency were real. Water experts focused on governance. A visiting hydrologist put it bluntly: an orchard can be a bank or a debt you repay with your aquifer. He pointed to the pilot's rulebook, a hard ceiling on groundwater pumping, and a pause trigger if monitoring wells fell. Then the mini failure hit, and it wasn't cinematic. Harmattan winds arrived early, pushing hot, dry air through a gap in the windbreak. Drip filters clogged with sand. One solar pump failed and sat idle while a small part was on the way from the city. In the lowest row, leaves curled and turned gray-green. By the end of the month, hundreds of seedlings were dead enough for old skepticism to roar back. Walnuts don't belong here, people said. This is another monument. At the next public update, the project tried to win back trust with numbers. An irrigation engineer showed survival rates by Block 1 strip dropped to 68% after the wind event, while a second strip protected by tighter windbreak geometry and better filtration held at 92%. He showed the critical weak water target in plain language, a fixed number of liters per tree per day, enforced by sensors and reduced further by mulch and shade collars. If we can't keep trees alive through 2 dry seasons under this system, we will not expand. But the cliffhanger didn't come from biology, it came from paper. A photocopied permit began circulating priority access to a borehole for strategic agricultural infrastructure, with language vague enough to scare everyone. Farmers read it as a warning that water rights were being locked in for the project first and household second, and then a serious incident forced the fear into the open. One night, villagers reported the pilot's pump running after curfew hours. By morning, arguments at the well turned into a shouting crowd, and Acha watched neighbors accuse each other of stealing water for trees. In that moment, 30 million walnuts stopped being a farming plan. They became a question of rules and trust. Can this belt grow without turning water into the spark that burns the community first? By the time the strategic borehole permit hit people's phones, the walnut plan stopped being about trees and started being about who gets to drink first. In the pilot village, the night the pump was heard after curfew turned into a morning of accusations. Someone ordered extra water, someone benefited, someone lied. And in the Sahel, where a dry well is a family emergency, suspicion spreads faster than any windbreak can grow. 3 blocks formed, each with a different fear. The first was households and small farmers who depend on shallow wells and hand-dug pits. The dead seedlings were almost comforting proof the desert still wins, until the permit suggested the project might be protected while their taps weakened. They demanded a simple rule: household water first and a public log of every pump hour. If the belt is real, one elder said, let it survive on the water we can all see. The second block was larger landholders, traders, and would-be processors who smelled a gatekeeping opportunity. They spoke politely about efficiency and export standards, but their push was clear: consolidate water rights and orchard parcels into fewer hands so quality could be controlled. They argued that scattered small plots would never produce consistent walnuts, and that the country needed a disciplined supply chain. Critics heard something else: a land and water grab dressed up as modernization. The third block came from hydrologists, clinic staff, and local security officials. Their worry was not only scarcity, but conflict. They warned that once water becomes a symbol of privilege, it invites sabotage, cut drip lines, stolen solar panels, poison rumors. And if an aquifer is overdrawn, the damage doesn't stay inside the pilot. It migrates as families move, and disputes travel with them. At the emergency hearing, the hardest question was repeated in 3 forms: who signed the permit, who controls the pumping cap, and where does the money go? When the project scales from a pilot to 30 million trees, then another piece of evidence surfaced, just enough to inflame the room: a procurement note listing pump capacity far above what the public water per tree chart implied. No one explained it. Was it backup for drought, a misprint, or a signal that the cap was never meant to bind? The risk now had a contagious logic. One night of pumping becomes a rumor. One rumor becomes a crowd at the well. One crowd becomes a threat to workers Aisha just trained with. She came for stable wages, but now she is trapped between neighbors who want the project shut down and supervisors who insist the belt is the future. As the meeting ended, a final question tightened the air. If walnuts are supposed to heal the Sahel, what happens when the first thing they grow is a fight over water rights and someone powerful benefits from the chaos? The day after the well argument, the Walnut team stopped trying to win the narrative and started trying to win back measurement. They called a public session at the pilot site and did something rare in Sahel projects. They opened the control box. The first payoff answered the permit panic head-on. The water engineer pinned up the borehole permit beside the pump log ledger, pulled straight from the controller. Then he explained one rule in plain language: the orchard can only draw water inside a fixed daily window capped by a weekly volume tied to monitoring wells. Every hour the pump runs is time-stamped and every liter is counted. To prove it, they read the curfew night data aloud. The pump had run for 12 minutes, but it was a filter backwash cycle that cleans sand-clogged lines, not irrigation. Then came the evidence everyone feared: the procurement note listing a pump capacity far larger than the public liters per tree chart. The engineer didn't deny it. He explained it: capacity is not usage. The pump was oversized so the same capped weekly volume could be delivered in short bursts during peak solar hours, reducing night pumping and cutting losses. The cap, not the motor, was the binding constraint. To make that credible, they wrote the cap into the controller as a hard limit and added SMS alerts to 2 elected board phones whenever the pump starts, plus a controller lock that requires 2 keys to override the schedule. The second payoff was governance people could touch. A community water board was formed with elected village representatives, women's group delegates, and a local hydrology officer. Its first power was simple: it could pause orchard pumping if household wells fell below an agreed depth. Its second power was visibility. A chalkboard at the main well listed yesterday's pump hours, today's cap, and the current monitoring well depth. Weekly receipts were posted publicly. Water became legible, and secret pumping became a claim that could be checked with logs. Next, the team addressed the dead seedlings. The proof critics said that walnuts don't belong here. Instead of defending the loss, they used it as the technical pivot. Survival maps showed the Harmattan wind gap strip failed, while a protected strip held. The fix was not inspirational. It was geometry and dust engineering, tighter windbreak spacing, temporary sand screens for the first dry season, shade collars for young trunks, and heavier mulch plus biochar to slow evaporation. Drip filtration was upgraded to a 2-stage sand and screen system, and the nursery extended hardening time before transplant. The message was simple: if the tree can't survive the first 2 dry seasons under Sahel conditions, it has no right to be scaled. The third payoff was economic, aimed at the value trap fear. Instead of letting processing become a new gate that squeezed farmers, the pilot signed a cooperative grading scheme. Nuts would be weighed and graded in front of farmer representatives with posted prices and the premium formula explained in public. A small shelling and oil press line was installed as a trial, 1 shift a day paired with transparent yield reports showing how much kernel and oil came out of each sack. Aicha's training turned into paid shifts with wages tied to posted output, not favors. Finally, the project answered the biggest cliffhanger: water for 30 million trees, by narrowing the claim. The plan was not to blanket the desert. It was to build a walnut belt only where microclimates, runoff capture, and monitored groundwater make the water math sane. Expansion would be conditional: no new block without survival through 2 dry seasons, no new block if monitoring wells fall, and no new block without functioning community governance and published logs. None of this erased risk, but it changed the conflict from rumor to rules. And it opens the next loop when the first real harvest arrives and real money enters the village. Can these safeguards survive the pressure to expand faster than the aquifer can support? 5 years after the pilot survived its first 2 dry seasons, the Walnut plan stops being a village argument and becomes a national rollout problem. The reveal is a 5-year Walnut Belt report stamped, budgeted, and tied to measurable gates. It sets 3 non-negotiables before any new block is planted: a verified survival rate through 2 dry seasons, stable monitoring well levels inside a public pumping cap, and a functioning community water board with posted logs and pause authority. That turns 30 million from a headline into a sequence of checkpoints that can be denied, delayed, or stopped. Scaling is built around clusters, not sprawl. Each cluster combines a micro-oasis orchard zone, a runoff harvesting perimeter of bunds and infiltration basins, and a service spine solar pumping, 2-stage filtration, spare parts storage, and a small field lab for moisture and quality checks. Instead of one giant pump that pushes operators into night irrigation, each module runs on a hard weekly volume cap written into the controller. Every pump start triggers an SMS to elected board phones, and buying points post weekly receipts so nobody can hide extra water behind a paperwork fog. Impacts are designed to land in 3 layers. At the agricultural layer, walnuts are treated as anchor trees for agroforestry rather than a monoculture fantasy. Windbreak rows reduce Harmattan damage on nearby millet and sorghum edges. Mulch biochars and ground covers slow evaporation, and runoff basins create moisture pockets that keep grasses alive longer after rains. The targets are not slogans. They are fewer dust storm school closures, fewer crop edge losses in the windiest weeks, and a longer forage window that eases pressure at wells before the hungry season peaks. At the industrial layer, the belt only counts if it builds processing that farmers can access. The report schedules shelling lines, oil presses, and packaging stations in step with realistic harvest forecasts, not political timelines. Cooperative grading is mandatory posted price tables, documented moisture targets, and open yield reports, so kernel losses cannot be hidden. Byproducts are designed into the business model. Shells become fuel pellets or biochar feedstock for mulch. Programs and press cake becomes livestock supplement that supports herders in the same districts. At the export layer, the plan stays cautious. A Sahel walnut brand is proposed only after consistent grading and moisture standards are met without hidden pumping. A portion of output is reserved for domestic products. First, walnut oil and paste sold through local markets, so the belt is not forced to chase foreign currency at the cost of community stability. When export contracts expand, the model recommends price floor clauses and transparent quality premiums published at buying points so farmers can see what they are actually being paid for. ISA 24 becomes the human face of this phase. He is an irrigation data technician trained during the pilot crisis, and his job is to make arguments measurable. He calibrates flow meters, audits, pump logs, checks soil moisture sensors, and trains new clusters to follow the same reporting rules. When disputes flare, the project stole our water, ISA can pull timestamps, cap reports, and well-depth charts that the community board also holds. His work is boring by design because boring is what prevents water from becoming a rumor weapon. But success multiplies threats. Climate volatility can compress rainfall into fewer, harsher storms. One breached bund can erase a season's runoff capture and trigger emergency pumping. Pests and disease can move along a belt of genetically similar trees, turning one bad cultivar choice into a slow disaster. Global walnut prices can swing, tempting processors to cut corners or communities to push expansion beyond monitoring limits. And water politics never disappears if powerful players capture permits, or processing the belt could recreate the same value trap it claims to break. That is why the report ends with a warning disguised as a checklist if governance fails, expansion stops. If logs stop being public, expansion stops. If household water priority or compensation slips, expansion stops. Many people say a Traoré-era spirit of self-reliance made this ambition thinkable. The next 5 years decide whether that spirit becomes a stable industry or another promise that dies when the pumps do. When you return to the first line, 30 million walnut trees in the Sahel, the shock isn't the ambition, it's the bargain hidden inside it. This plan only works if Burkina Faso can do something most restoration projects avoid: make water and money visible enough that ordinary people can enforce the rules. So here's the answer to the hook. Yes, walnuts can become an engine for both economic development and land recovery in parts of the Sahel. But not because walnuts are magical, because the project learned to treat the Sahel like what it is, a place where microclimates matter, timing matters, and governance matters more than seedlings. Where survival through 2 dry seasons is the entrance fee and public pump logs are the only things standing between micro-oasis and water theft. For Boubacar's success is simple and brutal. It's not a speech about exports. It's a season where the well level doesn't drop below the household line, where windbreak rows actually reduce harmattan damage on his millet edge, and where he can see the posted receipts and know he isn't being sacrificed for someone else's profit. For H's success is dignity and stability. It's a real wage at the shelling and oil line paid from posted output and transparent grading, not favors. It's the moment her family stops choosing between school fees and medicine because the village finally has a value chain, not just raw crops leaving on trucks. For Isa, the young technician, success is boring on purpose. Sensors calibrated, caps enforced, logs posted, arguments settled by timestamps, not threats. In a country trying to build self-reliance, that boring is what keeps the belt from turning into a conflict factory. And that's the real third meaning of this story. A tree belt is never only trees. It's a test of whether a nation can build a fair system under pressure when the first real harvest arrives, when the first big export contract lands, and when the temptation to expand faster than the aquifer can handle becomes irresistible. Many people say a Traoré-era spirit of self-reliance made the idea thinkable. The next question is whether that spirit can survive the first big money without breaking the water rules. If you want the next chapter, subscribe to Desert to Green, because the next video goes where this one is headed. What happens when high-value greening spreads across the Sahel? and water becomes the battlefield. Disclaimer, this video is fictional storytelling created for education, commentary, and entertainment. It is not a factual report or official information. Any similarities to real events are coincidental. Please enjoy it as creative content only.